Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new to this channel, you're welcome. My name is Phoebe and I'll call this channel my sewing corner because on this channel I share a lot of sewing tutorials, fashion tips generally, and I know I have been away for a long time, over 2 years plus, but I am back now, and believe me, I want to be more consistent than I ever was because I noticed that my channel, even though it was growing, it wasn't growing at the rate I would have wanted it to grow. So from the title of this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can make a female waist jacket or waistcoat. And this video is beginners friendly and very detailed. So if you'd like to see how I was able to make this, please make sure you keep on watching. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also like this video so that it gets recommended to other people. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So the first pattern I'll be drafting is that of the back. So the first thing I did was to mark ½ inch from the top of my paper, and I squared the line across, and that line will serve as the basis for all my vertical measurements. After that, from that point, I went ahead to mark my bust line, which was 9 inches, and from that point I went ahead to mark 17 inches, which is my waistline. After then, I marked these lines on the other sides of my paper and I connected the lines together. After I was done, I went ahead to label my bust line. I also did that for my waistline. Then I measured what I had left after my waistline. I had 3 inches, so I'm just going to take that to be my jacket length. Now, what I did next was from this point, I measured half of my shoulder measurement. 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then I came down from that point by 1 inch to create my shoulder slope. So for my armhole, I have 8 inches from my shoulder slant to my bust line. So my armhole is 16. When we divide that by 2, it is 8. So from this point, I took a neck width of 3.5 inches. Now because this is the back pattern, I'll be going for a neck depth of 1 inch. And I connected these 2 points together to form my back neckline. And I also created my shoulder slope line, as you can see here. To create a straight line for my armhole line, I just marked half of my shoulder measurements, which was 8 inches, and then I made a connection from my bust line to my shoulder slant line. To create my armhole curve, I divided my armhole line by 2 and came inwards by ½ inch. And then from here, I went ahead to measure half of my bust measurement. So my bust is now 39 from 38. So half of that was 9.75, and I went ahead to add 1.5 inch. Half an inch was for ease and 1 inch is the seam allowance. Moving on, to create the darts on my waistline, I went ahead to mark half of my bust pan measurement, which was 4.25. I marked the same thing on my bust line and also my jacket line. But then I made a connection from my jacket line, waistline, and to 1 inch below my bust line. You can see that right there. Now on my waistline, I marked ½ inch on both sides of the line and I made a connection from 1 inch below my bust line to those 2 points. And then from my waistline, I made a connection to my jacket line like this. So from my waistline, what I did was measure what I had from that point to this first line here. Then I moved it to the other dot line and I went ahead to mark a quarter of my waist measurement, which was 8 inches, 32 divided by 4. Yes, and I added 1.5 inches. So you already know ½ inch is the ease allowance, while 1 inch is the seam allowance. And then I connected my bust measurement and waist measurement like this. And then from my jacket line, I just made a curved, will I say curve? I just made a straight connection like that to my waistline. So this was because the jacket is not so long. It is just 3 inches below my waistline. So I went ahead to create my shoulder slope. No, my armhole curve, yeah. So from my shoulder slope or my shoulder slant, I created a connection towards my bust measurement on my bust line. And then I went ahead to cut out my back pattern. And while cutting out the shoulder area, I went ahead to add ½ inch as the seam allowance to join the shoulder to the front. So the back pattern is ready, and I'll be using the back pattern to create the front pattern. Because this is the front, we need to create a button extension. Now I went ahead to mark 1 inch from the edge of my paper like this. So one thing I realized was that I could have actually made my button extension to be 1.5. 1.5 is usually good when you're dealing with clothes that have button extensions, but in this video I used 1 inch, and then I went ahead to place my back pattern on that line where I marked the 1 inch for the button extension, and then I also went ahead to transfer the significant lines that I marked out on the back pattern. I marked it onto the front pattern, and after that I went ahead to just mark out this line so that it's more visible. Once that was done, what I did was to just mark out my shoulder line to be sure that I am right on track. I did the same thing at these 2 points here, and I went ahead to create a straight line like this for my armhole, and I'm just trying to make sure that I get my original shoulder slant line, which is here, and I created that to this point here. Now don't forget that I already added half an inch seam allowance to the shoulder of the back, so I'm just trying to differentiate that on the front so that we are not confused. Now this is my bust line, which is also my chest line. This is my waistline, and then I have my jacket line. So on my bust line, I'll be marking a quarter of my bust measurement. So my bust is 39. A quarter of that is 9.75 plus 1.5 inch allowance. Remember, half an inch is the ease allowance while 1 inch is the seam allowance. On my waistline, I went ahead to mark half of my bust band measurement. My bust band measurement is 7.5. I added half an inch allowance to that. That made it 4.25. The next line I'm marking here is my bust point line. So my bust point line is 11 inches. That is 2 inches below my bust line. There are two different things, bust line and bust point line. So I went ahead to square that line so that it is more visible. So remember that I had already marked 4.25 inches on my waistline. So I'll go ahead and mark that same thing on my bust point line, and then mark the same thing on my jacket line. So this will give us a straight line when I connect the points together. So I'm going to make a connection like this. So just like the back, I went ahead to find the midpoint of my armhole line, and then for the front I went inwards by a 0.75 inch, and then I made a connection like this to create my armhole curve. After that, on my waistline, I took a dart of 0.5 inch on both sides of the line. So I'll be marking 1 inch below my bust point line. So I just labeled that there. Then I marked 1 inch below my bust point line. And from that point, I'll go ahead and connect my dart line like this. So to create a princess dart style line for this jacket, I'll be making a connection from 1 inch below my bust point to my mid armhole point like this. After that, I'll be taking a dart of 1 inch from this point here, and then connect that point back to the 1 inch below my bust point like so. Now I'm going to make an extension of that 1 inch of dart that I took around there so that my armhole curve or my armhole is not short. So I connected that point back into my bust line, and now remember, because of this dart, I've taken a little bit of my bust measurement. So I measured what I had there and added that back to my bust line. Now on my waistline, I'm going to measure what I have there to the first dart line, move it over to the other line, and then go ahead and mark a quarter of my waist measurement plus 1.5 inch allowance, and I'm going to connect my bust line and my waistline like this, and also make a connection like so down to my jacket line. So you guys already know that I took 3.5 inches for the neck width. To get my neck depth, I first of all went ahead to mark the ½ inch that served as the top line for all my measurements. So this is the start point for all my measurements. Now from that point, I'll be taking my neck depth to be 9 inches. So the 9 inches is basically my bust line or my chest line. So I'll be making a curved connection over my button extension like so. So you can choose to make your neckline deeper or in whatever shape you want. Now after I did that, to reduce any chances of gaping, I measured that line and I went ahead to mark the midpoint. And then I'll be taking a dart of ½ an inch. So I connected that point towards my armhole line like so. This will reduce any gaping that might occur during the sewing process. I'm going to mark out that line like so, and then I went ahead to just cut out the middle of my dart line like so that I can close the dart right there on my armhole curve. So just pinch your paper like this and fold over the dart line, and then use your tape to hold the dart line in place. Now once that was done, I went back in to just cut out the remaining parts of my dart like this. So the next step is to also close this dart right here at the neckline. So I pinched it like this, and I just find a way to close the dart and use my tape to hold it in place. After closing the dart, I just went back to make sure that the line is well connected like this, And then I went ahead to just cut out the pattern. So I'm going to add half an inch allowance to the shoulder area just like I did for the back and continue cutting out my pattern like so. It was at this point that I realized that I did not create that V shape that we could find at the front part of the hemline, but I made sure to make that correction as this video progressed. So this is my back pattern. I didn't want it to have just one piece. That's why I went ahead to find the midpoint of my shoulder line and I connected that point back to my tack line, and I'll go ahead and split the back pattern into two like this. So after cutting out the pattern, this is my B1 and also this is my B2. And then for the front, I also went ahead to label here as my F1 and also F2. Now to adjust the front pattern, I went ahead to cut out a piece of paper like this. I also marked out my 1-inch button extension on the piece of paper, and I'm just going ahead to make sure that I match up the front patterns like so. So match up the dart points and also match up the button extension, and then use my tape to hold the points together in place. So from my jacket length, I went ahead to measure 4 inches. So you can choose to make yours longer or shorter, it all depends on what you want, but I went down by 4 inches and then use my ruler to connect the lines. Please don't forget that you can do this while drafting your pattern before cutting, but I totally forgot. That's why I'm doing that now. Then I measured what I had on my jacket line and then transferred that line back to that 4 inches, and then from here I marked out my 1-inch allowance and then connected from this point down to that 4 inches, and from that point I would also make a connection over or across my button extension, and then I extended this line right here. That's all I needed to do, and then I went ahead to just cut out my pattern. So the front pattern is ready as well as the back, and the next thing is to transfer my patterns to fabric. So this fabric is a leftover fabric that I've had for the past 2 years, so I can't tell how many years it was. So because the fabric is light, I'll be ironing this light interfacing on it to stabilize the fabric. So I've transferred my patterns to fabric, and this is for the back. I made sure to add half an inch seam allowance to the inner area and also to the hemline area. I didn't add half an inch seam allowance to the neckline, and the shoulder area already has half an inch seam allowance. I did not add to the armhole because this is a sleeveless jacket, but the side seam already has allowances that I added while drafting. For the front, I added half an inch seam allowance to the button extension area, and I also added half an inch seam allowance to the hemline area. The neckline has no seam allowance, but the shoulder already has half an inch seam allowance. I also added to this point for joining, and for the other side, I added half an inch seam allowance here, and to the hemline, no allowance here and here as well. So I also went ahead to cut out exactly the same thing for my lining pieces, as you can see here, and I added the necessary seam allowances. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to join the sides of both the lining together and also join the sides of both the main fabric together like so. So I've gone ahead to join the two front pieces, and I also went ahead to iron the seam allowances on the inside and also made sure to trim off the excess around this bust area so that there's no bulk. So this is what the back looks like after I was done joining, and just like the front, I made sure to iron the allowances on the inside so that I have a clean look. So the next thing I did here was to place the shoulders of both the front and back together, and I'll be joining them by the half an inch seam allowance I added. So here are my lining pieces for both the front and the back. I basically just joined them the same way I joined the main fabric. So I place the pieces together and I'll take it to my sewing machine and join them by the half an inch seam allowances I added there. At this point, I was done joining the shoulders of both the front and the back, and this is the lining, of course. So what I just did here was to place the right side of the lining and the right side of the fabrics together, making sure that I match them up together. So what I'll be doing now is to take this to my sewing machine. So from this button extension of the front, I would sew all the way over the back neckline to the other side of the button extension of the front. I'll also be sewing the armhole area as well. So I was done joining here and I used my hemming gum to sew the seam lines together so that when it's time to iron, it will lay nice and flat. So one thing I forgot to do while drafting was to shape the sides of the jacket. You can see that it's looking sharp and it's not supposed to look that way. So I'm just trying to match up the edges right here So I would be taking out 1 inch from this side. So I think I went up by 1 inch. So I'm just trying to confirm here. Went up by 1 inch and then blend it into the lower part, and I just trimmed it off. Simple and straight to the point. I think I missed one part of the back. So I placed the part that I had already cut out and went ahead to shape in the other part of the back. So once that was done, the next thing I'll be doing is to sew the hemline of the front. Unfortunately, my table is not so big, so I had to zoom out the video so that I can properly show you guys what I want to do. So from this point here, I'm going to sew all the way to this point, and on the other side, I'll basically do the same thing. So I won't be joining the hemline for the back just yet. So after joining the hemlines together, the next step is to flip it right side out. So from the back hemline, I'm going to pass my hand through this point here, and I'm going to take my time to pull out the front towards the outer part like this. So once the two parts were out, I took out time to make sure that I even out both the lining and the fabric so that when it's time to iron, everything comes out looking nice and flat. So the next stage is ironing. So I'll take this to my pressing iron and give the area a good press. So this is what it looks like after ironing. You can see because of the hemming tape or the hemming gum, the seam lines are looking very sharp. Now to close the hemline for the back, I just flipped my main fabric to the right side, and I'll also place the right side of the lining together, and I'll take this to my sewing machine and join them by the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So once I was done closing up the hemline, I also gave that area a good press so that it lays nice and flat. So the next thing or the next stage is to sew up the side seams. So I place the right side of the back and the right side of the front together. Remember that my allowance is 1 inch, so I'll go ahead and sew them together by my 1 inch allowance. After sewing up the side seams, don't forget to overlock the raw edges. As for me, I couldn't do that because I sold my overlocking machine because of Sapa years ago. So I'll be taking mine to the market for overlocking. So the final step for this jacket is to create the buttonholes. So these are the buttons that I'm going to be working with. So I think they were about 0.75 inch, and the spaces between them was 3.5 inches. So I just measured that to confirm that the spaces are even. So once that was confirmed, the next thing I did was to use my chalk to mark the spots where the buttonholes will be created. Again, I'll be taking this to the market for the buttonholes to be created. I could have done this at home, but I also sold my machine that makes buttonholes. So I'll go ahead and do this and show you guys the final look. Here's the final outcome of the waist jacket, and believe me, if there's anything I'm going to change if I were to make this jacket again, is to definitely increase the length. So if you don't know me, I'm actually a tall person, so this is quite short for me. I thought it was going to be long, but it's quite short for me. So if I'm going to make this again, which I actually plan to do, I'm going to make it a little bit longer, but this isn't bad. This isn't bad. So of course, the only thing I'm going to change is to just increase the length. Every other thing remains the same. So thank you all for sticking with me, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.